Prince Zillion of the arrogant Zygronian Empire is forced to travel to a distant human colony for diplomatic negotiations. Seething with disdain, he reluctantly agrees to utilize human transportation, much to the amusement and disapproval of his snobbishly superior entourage. As the human spacecraft takes off, Zillion braces himself for an agonizing journey. The sleek silver craft lifted off the launch pad, its engines roaring to life. Zillion gripped the edges of his seat, his sharp claws digging into the synthetic material. Around him, his advisor Colthan and several guards observed the proceedings with thinly veiled contempt. "Unbelievable that we must resort to these primitive conveyances," Colthan muttered under his breath, his tentacles twitching in annoyance. "The Emperor will hear of this indignity." Zillion shot his advisor a warning glare, silencing him. As the spacecraft gained altitude, the prince's gaze was drawn to the viewport, where the sprawling Zygronian capital shrunk into the distance. He couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment at being forced to venture into the unknown reaches of human-controlled space. "This is beneath us," he growled, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The humans should be the ones traveling to our world, not the other way around." The human pilot, a young woman with determined eyes, glanced back at the Zygronian entourage. "Welcome aboard, Your Highness," she said, her tone polite yet firm. "We'll have you to the human colony in no time." Zillion regarded her with disdain, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "See that you do, human. The sooner I can return to civilized company, the better." As the spacecraft climbed higher, breaking through the upper atmosphere, Zillion felt a twinge of discomfort. He had spent the majority of his life aboard the grand royal airships of the Zygronian fleet, luxurious vessels capable of crossing vast interstellar distances. The cramped confines of this human craft were a far cry from the opulent splendor he was accustomed to. Colthan leaned in, his bulbous eyes narrowing. "I must protest this arrangement, Your Highness. Surely we can requisition one of our own ships to transport us. This flying tin can is an insult to our status." Zillion raised a clawed hand, silencing his advisor. "The Emperor's orders were clear, Colthan. We are to utilize human transportation for this diplomatic mission, whether we like it or not." The older Zygronian hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "As you wish, Your Highness. But mark my words, the humans will regret their presumption in accommodating us in such a pedestrian manner." Zillion turned his gaze back to the viewport, watching as the vast expanse of space unfurled before them. Deep down, he shared Colthan's disdain for this arrangement, but he knew better than to openly defy the Emperor's will. With a resigned sigh, he braced himself for the long and arduous journey ahead, his mind already contemplating ways to make the humans pay for this indignity. To Zillion's horror, the human spacecraft is cramped and lacking in luxurious amenities. However, as the pilot skillfully navigates the craft, Zillion is grudgingly impressed by its speed and maneuverability, far exceeding anything in the Zygronian arsenal. He begins to cautiously observe the human crew's camaraderie and problem-solving abilities. As the spacecraft hurtled through the vastness of space, Zillion found himself growing increasingly agitated by the uncomfortable accommodations. The seats were narrow and the ceiling low, offering little in the way of personal space. Gone were the plush furnishings and expansive viewing decks he was accustomed to aboard Zygronian vessels. Colthan let out a soft hiss of displeasure. "This is an outrage. How are we expected to maintain our dignity in such cramped quarters?" Zillion remained silent, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. He refused to give the humans the satisfaction of seeing his discomfort, but deep down, he shared Colthan's sentiments. This was an indignity that the royal house of Zygronia should never have been forced to endure. Suddenly, the spacecraft shuddered, and Zillion felt a surge of alarm. His claws instinctively gripped the armrests, ready to spring into action. To his surprise, the human pilot calmly adjusted the controls, guiding the craft through the turbulence with practiced ease. "Just a bit of solar interference," she called out, her voice betraying no hint of concern. "Nothing to worry about, Your Highness." Cillian narrowed his eyes, reluctantly impressed by the woman's composure. As the spacecraft continued its journey, he observed the human crew with a newfound sense of curiosity. They moved with a sense of purpose, working together seamlessly to maintain the craft's systems. At one point, a warning light flashed on the console, and the pilot immediately sprang into action, conferring with her co-pilot. Within moments, they had identified and resolved the issue, restoring the craft's systems to full functionality. Cillian felt a twinge of begrudging respect. These humans, for all their apparent simplicity, displayed a level of competence that he had not expected. Their ability to work in harmony and address problems with such efficiency was a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies and bureaucratic red tape that plagued the Zygronian military. As the spacecraft accelerated, Cillian couldn't help but notice the sheer speed and agility of the craft. It darted through the void with a grace and responsiveness that eclipsed even the most advanced Zygronian airships. The prince found himself involuntarily leaning forward, his attention captivated by the display. Colfin, noticing his superior's sudden interest, cleared his throat. "Impressive, is it not, Your Highness? Though I hardly see how such a primitive conveyance could be superior to our own vessels." Cillian considered his advisor's words, but for once he found himself reluctant to dismiss the human's technological capabilities out of hand. There was a certain elegance to the way this spacecraft maneuvered, a quality that even he, with his refined sensibilities, could appreciate. As the journey continued, Cillian found himself observing the human crew with a growing sense of intrigue. Perhaps, he mused, there was more to these people than he had initially assumed. During the journey, Cillian is further surprised by the crew's resourcefulness and innovative solutions to maintain the spacecraft. Witnessing their adaptability firsthand, he slowly starts to question his long-held prejudices about human inferiority. An unexpected equipment malfunction tests the limits of the crew's abilities, but they prevail through teamwork and ingenuity. As the days passed, Cillian found himself increasingly drawn to observing the human crew's interactions. He watched with a mix of curiosity and bewilderment as they worked together to maintain the spacecraft's various systems. At one point, a critical component in the propulsion system began to malfunction, threatening to slow their progress. Rather than panic, the crew sprang into action, methodically troubleshooting the issue. To Cillian's amazement, they managed to jury-rig a temporary solution using spare parts and creative modifications. "Impressive," he murmured, unable to hide his surprise. Colfin, who had been observing the proceedings with a disdainful sneer, shot him a questioning look. "You cannot be serious, Your Highness. Surely you do not find these laborers worthy of your admiration." Cillian hesitated, considering his words carefully. "I merely acknowledge their resourcefulness, Colfin. In our own vessels, such a malfunction would have required a full stop and extensive repairs. Yet these humans seem to have found a way to continue our journey unimpeded." The older Zygronian scoffed. "Luck and nothing more. Do not be fooled by their apparent competence, Your Highness. These are still primitive beings, barely a step above animals in the grand scheme of the universe." Cillian fell silent, his gaze returning to the bustling activity in the spacecraft's main cabin. As he watched the crew work in seamless coordination, he found himself quietly questioning the validity of Colfin's dismissive assessment. Later, during a routine systems check, a more serious malfunction occurred. One of the craft's stabilizers malfunctioned, sending the entire ship into a violent roll. Cillian and his entourage were tossed about, their shouts of alarm echoing through the cabin. Yet once again, the human crew sprang into action. The pilot fought to regain control of the craft, her fingers dancing across the console with practiced precision. Meanwhile, her co-pilot and several technicians rushed to diagnose and repair the faulty stabilizer. Cillian gripped the armrests, his mandibles clenched tight as he watched the drama unfold. To his surprise, the humans succeeded in restoring stability to the spacecraft, navigating the crisis with a calm determination that belied their apparent primitive nature. As the craft continued on its course, Cillian found himself unable to ignore the growing sense of respect he felt for these humans. Their ability to overcome challenges through teamwork and innovative thinking was a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies and inflexibility of the Zygronian Empire. Colfin, sensing his superior's shift in demeanor, leaned in with a concerned expression. "Your Highness, is everything all right? You seem troubled." Cillian considered his advisor's words, then shook his head slowly. "I am merely reconsidering certain assumptions, Colfin. Perhaps these humans are not as primitive as we have always believed." The older Zygronian's eyes widened in shock, but before he could respond, Cillian turned his gaze back towards the viewport, lost in contemplation. The journey ahead would be a test not just for the human crew, but for the prince's own deeply held prejudices as well. Upon arrival at the human colony, Cillian is struck by the advanced infrastructure and the bustling, industrious nature of the human settlers. Expecting a primitive backwater, he is forced to concede that his preconceptions were entirely misguided. As the diplomatic negotiations begin, he observes the human representative's straightforward and pragmatic approach, which contrasts sharply with the convoluted Zygronian bureaucracy. The human spacecraft glided effortlessly through the atmosphere, its sleek form cutting through the wispy clouds. As the colony came into view, Cillian found himself unable to suppress a quiet gasp of surprise. Sprawling cities, connected by a network of gleaming infrastructure, dotted the landscape. Towering skyscrapers and bustling spaceports stood in stark contrast to the primitive images Cillian had conjured in his mind. This was no backwater settlement, but a thriving, technologically advanced human civilization. Colfin leaned forward, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "This is unexpected. I had anticipated a more rudimentary arrangement, not this level of sophistication." Cillian remained silent, his gaze fixed on the scene unfolding before them. As the spacecraft touched down at the colony's main landing platform, the prince felt a growing sense of unease. His long-held beliefs about human inferiority were quickly proving to be nothing more than arrogant presumptions. The human delegation that greeted them was equally impressive. Dressed in crisp, well-tailored uniforms, they approached with a confidence and poise that Cillian had seldom encountered, even among the noble houses of Zygronia. "Welcome to New Horizon, Your Highness," the lead human representative said, bowing slightly. "We are honored to host you and your entourage. If you'll follow me, we can begin the diplomatic proceedings." Cillian nodded stiffly, his clawed hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. As he followed the human delegation, he glanced sidelong at Colfin, who appeared equally bewildered by the unexpected display of sophistication. The negotiations that followed were equally eye-opening for the Zygronian prince. The human representatives approached the discussions with a level-headed pragmatism that stood in stark contrast to the convoluted bureaucracy and posturing that characterized Zygronian diplomacy. Cillian found himself listening intently, his preconceptions slowly crumbling as the humans articulated their positions with clarity and conviction. They spoke of technological advancements, cultural exchange, and the mutual benefits of a stronger alliance, concepts that seemed almost foreign to the prince's Zygronian sensibilities. At one point, a minor disagreement arose, and Cillian braced himself for the familiar political grandstanding that often plagued such proceedings. To his surprise, the human delegate swiftly identified the core issues, proposed reasonable compromises, and reached an amicable resolution in a matter of minutes. Colfin, who had been sulking in the corner, shot Cillian an accusatory glare. "You see, Your Highness, these humans are nothing but savages, dressed in the trappings of civilization. They lack the refinement and sophistication of our own people." Cillian considered his advisor's words, but found himself increasingly unconvinced. As he observed the human representative's composure and problem-solving prowess, he could no longer ignore the nagging suspicion that his own preconceptions had been fundamentally flawed. Perhaps, he mused, there was more to these humans than he had ever imagined. Determined to learn more, Cillian discreetly seeks out opportunities to immerse himself in human culture and society. He is captivated by their innovative spirit and the collaborative way they solve problems. Gradually, Cillian's disdain transforms into a growing sense of admiration, causing him to question the rigid hierarchies and customs of his own people. As the diplomatic negotiations continued, Cillian found himself increasingly drawn to observing the human delegates and their supporting staff. While Kolfin remained aloof and dismissive, the prince couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity about these seemingly remarkable beings. When the formal proceedings took a brief recess, Cillian seized the opportunity to explore the human colony on his own. Slipping away from his entourage, he navigated the bustling streets, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The humans moved with a sense of purpose, their interactions marked by an energy and vibrancy that Cillian had seldom witnessed among his own people. They worked side by side, collaborating on various tasks, seemingly unhindered by the rigid hierarchical structures that dominated Zygronian society. Cillian paused outside a towering structure, its sleek, angular design a stark contrast to the ornate, Baroque architecture of Zygronian buildings. A sign proclaimed it to be a research laboratory, and the prince felt a twinge of intrigue. Cautiously, he made his way inside, his clawed feet echoing against the pristine floors. The interior was a hive of activity, with humans of various ages and specialties moving between workstations, engaged in animated discussions. Cillian watched, transfixed, as they tinkered with complex machinery, tested innovative prototypes, and debated scientific theories with a fervor he had never encountered before. As he observed their problem-solving methods and collaborative spirit, a realization slowly dawned on the prince. These humans, for all their apparent simplicity, possessed a remarkable adaptability and resourcefulness that far exceeded anything he had witnessed in the Zygronian Empire. Cillian's gaze drifted to the ornate ceremonial saber at his side, a symbol of his royal status. He traced the intricate engravings with a clawed finger, suddenly feeling a growing sense of unease. The rigid hierarchies and traditions that had defined his life now seemed stifling, in stark contrast to the vibrant, dynamic environment he had encountered among the humans. Quietly, he slipped out of the research laboratory, his mind racing. Back in his temporary quarters, he sat in contemplation, his long-held beliefs about human inferiority crumbling like dust. The more he observed the humans, the more he realized that their apparent simplicity belied a remarkable depth of capability and innovative spirit. Kolfin, sensing his superior's pensive mood, approached with a concerned expression. "Your Highness, is everything all right? You seem troubled." Cillian considered the question, weighing his words carefully. "I am reconsidering certain assumptions, Kolfin. These humans, for all their apparent primitiveness, possess a remarkable resilience and adaptability that we in the Zygronian Empire have long overlooked." The older Zygronian's eyes widened in shock, his tentacles writhing in agitation. "Surely you cannot be serious, Your Highness. These are barbarians, little more than animals masquerading as civilized beings. How can you even entertain the notion of their superiority?" Cillian raised a clawed hand, silencing his advisor. "I did not say they were superior, Kolfin, but I can no longer ignore the evidence of their capabilities, nor the limitations of our own rigid traditions." As Kolfin sputtered in outrage, Cillian turned his gaze towards the distant stars, his mind already contemplating the implications of this newfound understanding. The journey ahead would be one of profound personal transformation, one that would challenge not just his beliefs, but the very foundations of the Zygronian Empire itself. When a crisis arises during the negotiations, Cillian's quick thinking and his understanding of human problem-solving strategies prove crucial in resolving the conflict. The human delegates are stunned by his resourcefulness and adaptability, a stark contrast to the inflexible Zygronian approach. Cillian realizes that the human strengths lie in their resilience, teamwork, and willingness to embrace change. The diplomatic negotiations resumed the following day, with tensions simmering just beneath the surface. Cillian could sense the growing unease among the Zygronian delegation, as Colfin's disdain for the humans had only intensified. As the discussions progressed, a sudden and unexpected crisis erupted. A technical glitch in the colony's communication system threatened to derail the delicate proceedings, cutting off the human delegates from their political leadership. Cillian watched as the humans sprang into action, their faces etched with determination. They quickly divided into teams, each tackling a different aspect of the problem with a level of coordination that impressed the prince. Colfin, on the other hand, grew increasingly agitated, his tentacles writhing in frustration. "See, Your Highness, this is exactly the kind of incompetence we should expect from these primitive beings. We should take control of the situation and impose our own solution." Cillian held up a clawed hand, silencing his advisor. "Wait, Colfin. Observe." The human technicians worked tirelessly, their fingers flying across consoles as they diagnosed the issue. Cillian watched, his keen eyes scanning the scene, his mind rapidly processing the information. Suddenly, an idea struck him. Stepping forward, he approached the lead human delegate, who eyed him with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Might I offer a suggestion?" Cillian said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. The human hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Of course, Your Highness. We welcome any assistance you can provide." Cillian quickly outlined his plan, drawing on his understanding of Zygronian communication systems and the human crew's problem-solving methods. To the astonishment of both the Zygronian and human delegates, his proposed solution proved effective, rapidly restoring the critical link. The human technicians stared at Cillian in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. The lead delegate stepped forward, a grudging respect etched upon his features. "Your Highness, that was impressive. I must admit, I did not expect such resourcefulness from a Zygronian noble." Cillian inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I have learned much from observing your people, delegate. Your ability to overcome obstacles through teamwork and innovation is a quality I had previously underestimated." Colfin, his tentacles twitching in indignation, shot Cillian a withering glare. "Your Highness, this is unacceptable. You cannot possibly be considering aligning yourself with these savages." Cillian turned to his advisor, his gaze unwavering. "I am not aligning myself with anyone, Colfin. I am merely acknowledging the strengths of the humans, strengths that we in the Zygronian Empire have long ignored to our detriment." The older Zygronian opened his mouth to protest, but Cillian silenced him with a raised hand. "The time has come for us to reassess our views and embrace change, if we are to forge a truly meaningful alliance with these remarkable beings." As the negotiations resumed, Cillian watched the human delegates with a newfound sense of respect, his earlier prejudices crumbling like dust. He realized that the humans' true strength lay not in their technology, but in their resilience, their collaborative spirit, and their willingness to adapt, qualities that the rigid Zygronian Empire had long lacked. The journey ahead would be one of profound transformation, both for Cillian and for the relationship between their two vastly different civilizations. Returning to the Zygronian Empire, Cillian advocates for closer diplomatic and economic ties with the human colony, much to the consternation of his fellow Zygronian nobles. His newfound appreciation for human capabilities marks the beginning of a transformative shift in Zygronian human relations. The diplomatic negotiations concluded with a landmark agreement, paving the way for unprecedented cooperation between the Zygronian Empire and the human colony. As Cillian and his entourage prepared for their return journey, the prince found himself wrestling with a growing sense of unease. Colfin, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, approached Cillian as they boarded the human spacecraft. "Your Highness, I must speak with you, privately." Cillian nodded, gesturing for his advisor to follow him to a secluded area of the craft. Once they were out of earshot, Colfin unleashed his pent-up frustration. "What in the name of the ancients was that display back there, Your Highness? Aligning yourself with these humans, as if they were our equals. Have you completely lost your senses?" Zillion held up a clawed hand, silencing the older Zygronian. "Colthan, you must understand. My eyes have been opened to the capabilities of the human people. Their resilience, their innovative spirit. These are qualities we in the Empire have long overlooked." Colthan's tentacles writhed in agitation. Overlooked? Overlooked? They are primitive beings, unworthy of our consideration. The Emperor will never approve of this fraternization with the barbarians. Then the Emperor will have to reconsider his position. Zillion said, his voice calm but resolute. "I have witnessed firsthand the potential for a mutually beneficial alliance between our peoples. We have much to learn from the humans, Colthan, if we are willing to set aside our arrogance and prejudice." The advisor stared at Zillion, his expression a mix of disbelief and outrage. "You would defy the will of the Emperor himself. The consequences of such an action would be unthinkable." Zillion met Colthan's gaze without flinching. "I am prepared to face those consequences, Colthan. For too long, the Zygronian Empire has stagnated, clinging to outdated traditions and dismissing the innovations of other civilizations. The time has come for us to embrace change, to forge new alliances, and unlock the true potential of our people." As the spacecraft hurtled through the void, Zillion's mind raced with the implications of his newfound convictions. He knew that his proposal for closer ties with the humans would be met with fierce resistance from the Zygronian nobility, but he was determined to see it through. The journey back to the imperial capital was marked by an uneasy silence, as Colthan brooded in sullen silence. Zillion, on the other hand, found himself filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He had glimpsed the future, a future where the Zygronian Empire and the human colony worked in harmony, their combined strengths propelling them to new heights of achievement. As the spacecraft touched down on the gleaming spires of the imperial city, Zillion steeled himself for the battle that lay ahead. He would need to navigate the treacherous political landscape of the Zygronian court, but he was no longer willing to accept the status quo. The time had come to challenge the very foundations of his people's beliefs and usher in a new era of progress and cooperation. As the Zygronian Empire gradually opens up to human influence, Zillion emerges as a respected intermediary, bridging the cultural divide. His newfound appreciation for human ingenuity and resilience inspires a new generation of Zygronian thinkers to embrace innovation and collaboration. The once dismissive Prince Zillion has become a catalyst for a thriving Zygronian-human alliance, forever altering the course of interstellar history. The imperial court erupted in outrage as Zillion presented his proposal for closer diplomatic and economic ties with the human colony. Colthan, true to his word, had wasted no time in voicing his objections to the Emperor and the Zygronian nobility. "This is madness," one of the elder counselors bellowed, his tentacles lashing the air in fury. "The prince would have us surrender our hard-won sovereignty to these barbarians." Zillion stood his ground, his unwavering gaze meeting the counselor's accusatory stare. "I do not propose surrender, counselor. I advocate for cooperation, for the mutual exchange of knowledge and resources that will strengthen both our civilizations." The chamber descended into a cacophony of shouts and protests, as the Zygronian nobles struggled to comprehend the prince's radical ideas. Zillion weathered the storm, his determination only hardening in the face of such vehement opposition. It was the Emperor himself who finally silenced the uproar, raising a clawed hand. "Enough. Let the prince speak." All eyes turned to Zillion, who took a deep breath before continuing. "My fellow Zygronians, for too long we have clung to the belief that our way is the only way. We have dismissed the innovations and achievements of other civilizations, convinced of our own superiority." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "But in my time with the humans, I have witnessed firsthand the remarkable capabilities of their people. Their resilience, their collaborative spirit, their willingness to embrace change. These are qualities we in the Empire would do well to emulate." The Emperor's brow furrowed, his mandibles clicking in contemplation. "And you believe an alliance with these humans would benefit the Zygronian Empire?" "I do. "Your Majesty," Xillian replied, his voice unwavering. "The humans possess technological and scientific advancements that could elevate our own capabilities. Their innovative spirit could breathe new life into our stagnating society. Together, we could forge a future of unparalleled progress and prosperity." The chamber fell silent as the Zygronian nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Kolfin, his tentacles trembling with rage, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot entertain such heresy. This is nothing more than the foolish ravings of a prince who has been corrupted by his time with the barbarians." Xillian turned to his advisor, his eyes narrowing. "Corrupted, Kolfin, or perhaps I have merely opened my eyes to the truth. The time has come for the Zygronian Empire to embrace change, to step out of the shadows of our own arrogance and claim our rightful place among the stars." The Emperor raised a clawed hand, silencing the renewed clamor. "Enough. We will consider the prince's proposal and its merits in due course." As the court dispersed, Xillian found himself at the center of a maelstrom of whispered conversations and covert glances. Yet, despite the lingering resistance, he sensed a shift in the air, a growing curiosity, a willingness to at least entertain the possibility of a Zygronian human alliance. In the days and weeks that followed, Xillian emerged as a respected intermediary, bridging the cultural divide and sharing his insights on the remarkable capabilities of the human civilization. A new generation of Zygronian thinkers, inspired by his words, began to explore the possibilities of innovation and collaboration. The once dismissive Prince Xillian had become a catalyst for a profound transformation, one that would forever alter the course of interstellar history and usher in a new era of unprecedented cooperation between the Zygronian Empire and the human colony.